Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to today's Red Talk South Korea webinar. Today, we will talk about the South Korea wind energy market and explore this crucial market of unlimited potential hosted by Leader Associates. And this is Dari, project producer of Green Energy Future South Korea 2020. Red Talk South Korea is the online live webinar to bring you more South Korea focused fitness contents during the COVID-19 outbreak, complementing the physical gathering of Green Energy Future South Korea 2020. Yes, please kindly find the agenda of today's webinar on this slide. Our respectful speakers are Mr. Wings, Associate Director from IHS Markit, and Mr. William, Vice President, Sales Asia Pacific from Vistas, and Mr. Jacques, Country Manager, South Korea from Equinor. Every presenter's presentation will be consist of 20-minute speech and a 10-minute Q&A section. Before we start, to help audience engage in the session and interact with our speakers better, I have a few housekeeping items to remind in advance. First of all, it is a sound issue. If you can hear me now, you are probably doing just fine with the audio. But if at any time during the presentation you have sound problems, you can switch over to the telephone mode. As you can see at the bottom of your control panel, there is a chat box option. We have already kept the dial-in number inside this column while the webinar and participant ID person by person. Please kindly check the email notification and call in with your own ID. Second of all, interactive Q&As. During the presentation, the audience microphone will be muted to avoid having background noises. For questions directly to our presenters, there is a Q&A box for your usage. We will go through the questions at the end of each presentation. And one important note is that please do not add further questions or comments once the Q&A section starts, as we hope to create a more comfortable environment for presenters and address the pre-asked questions instead of being interrupted by constantly popped-up messages. In the meantime, our team led at Leader Associates will help out in addressing some of your questions. In the case that we do not respond to your questions promptly, it means the question has been passed over to speakers for independent address. And last, material issues. Yes, this is many audience has already asked. Today's webinar recordings will be shared with all of you by email within next week and be posted on Green Energy Future South Korea website as well as social media channel at the same time. Okay. The last slide of my presentation is who we are at Leader Associates and what we do. Leader Associates is an international clean energy event organizer and is one of the largest in Asia Pacific. We are going to host our Green Energy Future South Korea event on September the 1st and the 2nd in Seoul, and would like to take the opportunity staying connected with all community peers. An extra 10% of discount will be given to today's audience for your conference tickets by using the code GEFSK0611. And now, without further ado, let's start with our first presenter of today, Mr. Wings, Associate Director from IHS Markit, with a strong background in the policy research, strategy development, and financial analysis in the energy sector. Mr. Wings, could you please share your screen, please? Hi, Mr. Wings. Yes, let's share your screen.
Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar on South Korea wind energy. My name is Vince. I'm working for Gas, Power, and Energy Futures team in IHS Markit. So now in South Korea, the word Green New Deal became kind of mainstream topics in lots of major media and policy debates. And also South Korea government wants to increase the offshore wind capacity to 12 gigawatts by 2030 from nearly zero today. So I think it's very timely that we have time to review the government's policy and also its implication on the wind industry. Right, so For next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about the potential of wind market in South Korea with a focus on offshore wind. So I'm going to start with COVID-19 impact on the power market, especially power demand and supply in separately. And then we'll touch upon the 9th basic plan for electricity demand and supply, which was released last month, the draft version. And third, I think this is the one of the most crucial part of the presentation. So I'm gonna share the insights on the S&P and REC price, which is the most important revenue stream for the offshore wind projects. And lastly, I'm gonna talk about the key opportunities and challenges of running offshore wind business in South Korea. Okay, so let me start with how the energy market is coping with COVID-19. So South Korea has performed relatively well in COVID-19 containment. The latest GDP outlook from IHS Market Economics shows 0.9% decline this year, which is a first time Korean real GDP has fallen over the last 2 decades, but it's still higher than many other developed countries. If you look at the left chart, we can see that power demand in Q1 has dropped about 1.8% year on year, mainly due to the contraction in the industrial consumption. Interestingly, you can also see that as people spend more time at home, the residential consumption actually increased during the same period. And going forward, we are expecting the power demand to decline further because the impact of the COVID-19 globally, as most countries are running through the lockdown period, will hit the export-oriented economy. Now, on the power generation side, solar generation stands out in Q1, increased about 40% year-on-year basis. And this is mainly because the capacity addition last year marked the record 3.4 gigawatts. And it's also because the renewable power in South Korea gets priority dispatch in power dispatch, meaning that the power generation from renewable sources will be protected from power demand decline. Also, you will notice that the natural gas generation has increased above 10% year-on-year basis. And this is mainly because the South Korea government introduced measures to limit coal generation in order to combat the fine dust issues. And it was implemented from December to March this year. So you can see that the coal generation was hit hard while the natural gas generation actually increased. Now, let's look at the energy policy. So the draft 9th basic plan for electricity demand and supply, called BP, was unveiled last month. And this is a biannual demand and supply plan with 15-year outlook. And they are one of the most important energy plan because it represents long-term capacity mix target and also shows all the target project pipeline with individual timelines. Now we have 2 important takeaways from this draft. So number 1, increase in LNG capacity. So as you can see in the chart, gas-fired power capacity increases over 20 gigawatts, and it would reach over 60 gigawatts in 2034. That's gonna happen in next 50 years. What this means is that it's gonna replace some of the old retiring nuclear and coal plants in the same period, as the government is pushing coal and nuclear phase out. And number two, on the renewables, you will see that renewable will become the largest generation sources, becoming almost 80 gigawatt capacity in 2034. So this will account for about 40% renewable capacity share in 2034. Now, for those who are working in the renewable energy industry, I think they might have some question looking at this chart. Like, the main question that can be raised is, would the power demand increase be enough to catch up with all these new capacity additions? Because you are seeing that the capacity additions, if you add up all this together, it's going to be nearly 200 gigawatts from currently about 125 gigawatts. And if there is not enough power demand, the more expensive generation units, such as gas-fired power generators, have to stay idle. And even for renewables, some of them will have to be curtailed in certain time of the day if the power supply exceeds the power demand. Currently, there is no curtailment rule in South Korea because the renewable generation share is quite low at the moment, but the government will soon working on developing some relevant rules. So they are preparing like what's going to happen if the renewable generation actually exceeds the power demand in certain time. Now, there's another important element, which is coal generation. So the government wants to tackle the air pollution issues. And as I mentioned earlier, they want to control the coal generation in order to combat the air pollution issues on an ongoing basis. And it's going to make some room both for gas and renewable in terms of power generation. And we will get more details once the final version will be released. We think that the final version will be released sometime in Q3. Now, with all these new capacity target, let's have a look at what's going to happen on the offshore wind. So here we are showing the offshore wind capacity additions up to 2030. So now, as I mentioned earlier, it's currently about 30 megawatt in the market. So it's nearly zero. And what we are projecting is about 8 gigawatt. It's below the government target of 12 gigawatt, but it's still a lot of big business opportunities for those who are looking at the South Korean market. And we estimate that many of the capacity additions will happen after 2023, as in the chart, for mainly two reasons. So for the first reason is that many of the near-term offshore wind projects, we think that are likely to get delayed than their original plan, mainly due to many complex permitting process, which are not well addressed at the moment. And also many projects are suffering from community acceptance issues. So for instance, Southwest Offshore Wind Project, which was originally due to come online in 2018, is still under construction. It's going to come online this year, but it's been delayed for over 2 years now. And we believe that this would happen for some of the near-term projects. And number two, the lack of clarity in current RPS mechanism can put some of the offshore wind project financing at risk. Offshore wind projects generally require large-scale upfront investment. So unless there is no clear guideline on the tariff and the reg price, and all these contractual arrangements, it's going to be really difficult to get large-scale investment like project financing. And we haven't seen a clear policy signal yet. So until we get more clarity, we think that some of the near-term projects is likely to get delayed. Now, let's have a look at the wind resource in South Korea. So I'm gonna touch a little bit about the project pipeline and in association with the wind resource. So the average wind speed for offshore wind projects near the shore typically is about 6 to 7 meters per second. And this level is lower than the wind speed that you see in the country like Taiwan or the UK, which shows about 10 meters per second wind speed. And depending on the turbine model, this wind speed can be translated into about 30% capacity factor. Now, if you go far from the shore, as you can see from the map, you see the red shaded area, and that shows about 8 to 9 meters per second, which is higher than the near shore regions. So there's clearly some incentive to build floating offshore wind far from the shore so that you have a better capacity factor. And also there's another benefit that you can minimize some potential conflicts with communities in the shore side. So I'm going to touch a little bit more in the later slide, but we are seeing a large scale floating offshore wind will be built after 2025. As you can see on the left, the gray big balloon indicating a big floating offshore wind projects. Now, let me turn to the REC market or the RPS market, which is a very crucial element in evaluating project economics in South Korea. So just to give you a background, in South Korea, power generators with over 500 megawatt capacity should generate a certain percentage of power from renewables or buy the credits from other renewable power generators. Now, if you see on the left, REC market currently is in oversupply situation. So the REC supply, which is the gray line, indicating the certificate volume issued from renewable generation, exceeds the green line, which is the renewable energy generation target set by RPS scheme. And you see that as the pace of new renewable deployment exceeds the RPS target, in the market you will see a lot of RECs while you have less demand to purchase them. And this is partly also driven by generation companies, GenCos, trying to make direct investment in renewable energy. So on the right chart, you see the green area where the generation companies are actually making direct investment, meaning that they would have less demand to purchase REC from the market. So what's going to happen in the future for S&P and REC? S&P and REC price are the revenue stream of your investment. So obviously it's very important that you project what's going to happen for next 10 to 20 years. And if you see the trend of S&P on the left, S&P, just to give you a background, so S&P is the wholesale power price, which is set by the generation cost of the marginal generation units in power dispatch. And this has declined this year as the power demand was hit by the COVID-19. So you see the declining trend after January this year. And we believe that the S&P will continue to stay low throughout this year because the power demand will not get recovered quickly this year. And also oil price and gas price will stay low as well. REC price on the right-hand side is still very uncertain for offshore wind projects because there is no benchmark price for offshore wind because the market doesn't barely exist at the moment. So what we did is instead we took the REC price from one of the government think tanks' recent reports on LCO study, took them as a benchmark bid price, and we assessed whether the offshore wind projects could be in the money in next 10 years. So this benchmark bid price is shown in a gray shaded area on the right chart. And the required REC price, which is a blue dotted line, depending on the different REC assumptions, it means the minimum REC price to achieve a target IRR. So it would decline over time as the technology cost come down. Now you can see that from the year 2023, 2024, the required REC price, the green or the blue dotted line, would get lower than the benchmark REC bid price, meaning that the offshore wind project could be in the money. The REC market or the RPS mechanism cannot be sustainable in the long run because it's reliant on the government budgets. So as you see in the other markets, many countries begin to take out the subsidy in the renewable energy market, and same could happen in South Korea in some time in the future. So what the government is looking at is what's going to happen after the RPS. And like in many other countries, corporate PPA is one of the options that the government is looking at. Now, running or implementing corporate PPA in South Korea is very challenging at the moment. And that's because the current regulation does not allow companies to operate in both power generation and power sales at the same time. So this regulation basically prevents renewable generators from selling power to consumers. So corporate PPA is not a viable option at the moment. So as an alternative or as an interim measure, what the government is trying to do is to introduce a so-called third-party PPA as an interim or transitional scheme where the CAPCO, the utility company, becoming a third-party intermediary between the power generators and the power consumers. And we think that this could be introduced from 2021, next year, as the government is planning to do, and also because the legal amendment for running third-party PPA is not very rigorous as it is required for changing a law for corporate PPA. So we think that this will happen, but whether this is gonna make a big change in the market, what we are seeing at the moment is that its impact would be limited. And the main reason is that the tariff, which will be set by the CAPCO, will be higher than the rates that you are paying from the grid. So there's not much incentive for power consumers to pay premium just because the power is coming from renewables. We see that for some of the compliance reasons like RE100, it can work for some companies, but it's going to be very difficult to become a mainstream, big game changer. Now, to summarize the opportunities and challenges for running offshore wind business in South Korea. So on the opportunity side, I mentioned that there is big potential in floating offshore wind because of the good wind resource far from the shore. And also because there are some other advantages, like you can save some of your capex using existing infrastructure, like a gas platform or TNT infrastructure, which is already there. And also you have some local resources that you can utilize, like local EPC companies which has a good offshore engineering skills. And another important opportunity in South Korea is that the government just passed a law this January to introduce a new compensation scheme. So this will be introduced this year. What this will do is that the government provides a legal framework to compensate the communities near the project sites. So it can address some of the issues with the fishery industry, for instance. And lastly, the South Korea is also very bullish on hydrogen economy, and electrolysis or this green hydrogen, so making hydrogen from renewable, will become a backbone of hydrogen economy in the long run. And certainly the offshore wind has a very important role to play there. Now on the challenges side, I already mentioned that there are some complicated issues in terms of permit process. And recently, we also heard that the so-called marine spatial planning is causing some kind of problems, adding actually more regulatory hurdles to gain a permission. So this could actually delay some of the projects in the near term. And also some of the fishery industry having an demonstration against a new offshore wind projects. This could also delay the projects. Also, whether there will be adequate level of support. This all also depends on individual local governments and also the political environment there. So it's all different by location and where you're running the projects. And also on the RPS, whether it's going to be consistently running throughout the next 10 years or 20 years, like we don't have clear direction from the government yet. And lastly, there is some nearly local content requirement issues that we've seen in some of the procurement process. So this is not like easily visible, but it can be an issue if you are like foreign players trying to get into the South Korea market. So lastly, for those who want to understand more about our insights on power and renewable, please check out our website there. Okay, so this is end of my presentation. Thanks for listening, everyone. And I would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot for the presentation, Mr. Vince. And yes, this is really informative and educational for us to have a clear picture of the South Korea wind energy market, especially on the policy side. And besides the presentation, we have some questions from the audience and collected from the registration earlier. So can you see the questions on this slide, and could you please answer some of them?
Yep, sure. So let me start with the first one, regulations or local content requirement. So in South Korea, technically there is no local content requirement per se. And as a foreign companies, you're not required to use, for instance, domestic content or technology. However, the current government puts priority in fostering domestic industry and job creation. That's their number one priority. And you have to understand this because in many cases, you will actually see some invisible barriers during the procurement process. I can give you some example. Like for instance, one of the offshore wind projects very recently opened a tender for turbine procurement, and it assigned 30% of turbine volume to only domestic companies. So this is more obvious case on the local content requirement. In other cases, some tenders would put some specific requirements. such as you need to have some adequate domestic project experience. So as a foreign company, this could be also a barrier. So now how you can manage this issue. So as a foreign companies, it's very critical that you get involved in advance and prior to the procurement process begins. That's very critical. And also you need to make a closer relationship with many key players, just like CAPCO and many generation companies and even the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, for instance. And also there are many private companies in South Korea running IPP business who are willing to partner with foreign companies. So this could be a good important asset for you to understand the South Korean market. I hope this answered the first question. And the second one, REC plus S&P price trend. So I touched upon the REC price trend. So I'll speak more, a little bit more about the S&P price. So for the S&P price, there are many important factors that are affecting the S&P price. And if I take three important factors, it would be power demand, capacity mix, and gas price. So firstly, on the power demand, as I mentioned earlier, the power demand will stay low throughout the year. In the long run, we expect a modest growth, like 1% growth every year. So it's sort of given. And second, on the capacity mix, in the long run, as the government push out nuclear and coal from the power dispatch, you will see more expensive, relatively more expensive gas-fired power generators generating power in the market. And this will push up S&P price in the long run. However, in the short term, the things are a little bit different, because in the short run, for next 4 years, some of the new nuclear and coal will actually come online. So these are the power plant that were already under construction, and this will come online for next 4 years. So the dynamic in the short term and the long term would be a little bit different. Lastly, on the gas price. So in IHS market, we also forecast the gas price, and we expect that the wholesale gas price for power generators will gradually increase in the long term. So it will also put some upward pressure on the S&P. So because the S&P price is a very critical element for making investment decisions, we in the IHS market, we are also working on long-term price S&P price forecast model. Lastly, local government investment support and measures to ease the burden of obtaining community consent. So I touched a little bit on this, and this is a very, I would say, a very complicated process for many of the foreign companies who want to run a business in South Korea. And it's also very important that you understand what the local government is trying to do and what the national government is doing for offshore wind projects. At the local level, as I mentioned, it differs by region. In some local government who is more willing to support offshore wind projects, they're helping all this administrative process and also help build the demonstration projects, just like in many of the other countries. At the national level, the government recently passed a new community support program. So this one I already mentioned earlier briefly. So what this does is that at the moment, the compensation scheme only applies to the residents within a 5-kilometer range of the project sites. And as you build offshore wind projects far from the shore, for instance, the communities located, let's say, 10 kilometers of offshore wind project sites are not eligible for this compensation scheme. So in order to address this kind of issue, the government changed this regulation, and the new compensation scheme will help compensate even the communities which are located 10 or 20 kilometers from the offshore wind sites. So they have some kind of scheme where proportionally the level of compensation decreases as the offshore wind site is built far from the shore. So it is, because offshore wind market is not here yet, you will see lots of changes in the regulation and lots of policy debates on an ongoing basis. So it's important that you keep an eye on what's going on here, and also get engaged with the dialogue with both national and local government. So I hope this answers this question.
Yes, thank you so much for your patient answer. And Mr. Wing's answer is like 10 more questions for you in the Q&A box. If you have time, you can also interact with the audience and type to answer the questions. And because due to the timing, we will welcome our next presenter, Mr. William.
Sure.
Okay. Yes. So let's welcome our next presenter, Mr. William, Vice President, Sales, Asia Pacific from Vestas. He has with over 15 years of experience across a number of industries in many parts of Asia Pacific. William is passionate in creating value within the renewable energy space. And Mr. William, yes, he will more focus on the onshore wind sector. And could you please share your screen?
Well, thanks, Terry, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. For those in Asia and for those joining us for other places of the world, good morning, good evening, whatever it is. I hope you're all safe. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this Renewable Energy Talk South Korea. I am very happy to be here with you today and to share a little bit of our knowledge. Obviously, I'm taking, or I will try to skip a little bit what has been already presented by Vince in the previous presentation. I think it was very interesting to see that we have at least the same understanding. So I will probably go a little bit faster on some of the market overview. But yes, I will focus with an angle on the onshore wind, and then also with what we see the challenges in the onshore wind and what we could recommend to improve the situation in order to achieve the government goals. So let's get started. You've seen also that in the presentation, there is huge goals to achieve higher renewable energy mix, and there is this 2030 plan of 20% of renewables, mainly composed of solar, obviously, with more than 30 gigawatt to be built this decade, 15 or 16 gigawatt of wind, and a few of biomass and small hydro as well. This will include, obviously, I would say a large amount of large-scale projects in order to build in such a quick timeline that many megawatt or gigawatts. So just to give you an idea, in the current RE 3020 plan, so the 20% renewable by 2030, it is estimated that more than 28.8 gigawatts come from large scale. And within that, if we want to go into a little bit more detail, I would say 5 gigawatt really has to come from the short term, and an additional 24 gigawatt, which is what we see at the mid to long term, so 2023 to 2030 onwards. When we look a little bit at the picture of the onshore wind markets, Vestas is very well positioned. We started in Korea more than 20 years ago, and we have been installing since then more than 500 megawatts. And we have known or seen two different schemes, very different. Previous or before 2012, it was a feed-in tariff regime, and since then it has been a renewable portfolio standard or RPS regime, and this has been supportive, I would say, of the market growth. But on the other hand, also we're going to see what are the effects of these RPS standards, and I think Vince have touched on that already on the market price of the electricity, which is what I think is driving the sector at the moment. So I wanted to start with an overview of where those wind farms are installed. And you can see that it's mainly in the south, both South Jeolla province and Jeju Island, and the northeast of Korea, Gangwon province and Gyeongsang province. The other provinces of the south, North Jeolla and South Gyeongsang, has a little bit of wind installed, but unfortunately, I think that most of the resources remains untapped. There is also a certain number of sizable projects that are already now available for repowering. We see projects that have been commissioned back in 2006, 2008, and obviously are going to be soon reaching the end of life, because the feed-in tariff was also a shorter PPA, 16 or 17 years. So unless, and at the moment, I don't think there is a clear regulation about that, unless there is a possibility for the owners to extend the new PPA, they will probably have to decommission those wind farms. And that will be obviously an opportunity to apply to the new mechanism and to upgrade to also newer, bigger technology. When you look at the projects which are pending on different permitted stages in Korea for onshore, you see that there is a significant amount of projects actually which are under development. It's a large pipeline with more than 1 gigawatt that could be theoretically put in place and installed in 2020. That's about 45 projects. Next year, a pipeline of 1.6 gigawatts, another 47 projects, and 2022, 2.6 gigawatt with 75 projects. And then a few more in 2023. Most of these projects are also located in the same provinces that we see today as the provinces where most of the wind is installed, so South Jeolla, Gangwon, and North Gyeongsang provinces. But the other provinces also have a few wind projects there under permitting. Jeju Island being a separate or separately regulated province, I will not really touch these. We don't have, I would say, much visibility at the moment if there will be anything in the future there, but they have been one of the leaders, and I hope that obviously they will continue with ambitious construction of onshore and offshore wind farms. Now, I wanted to talk about a little bit the wind conditions in Korea. Generally, what we see are what we call medium to low wind speed. It's very rare. It happens, and if you've got one, then you're one of the lucky ones. But it's really rare to have higher wind speeds than 7.5 meters per second. I would say most of the wind farms that are being built or are under permitting and are expected to be built are between 6.5 and 7.5 meters per second. We see extreme wind speeds, though, which are more in the class 2 range with the V50 of 60 meters per second gust and V50 of 42.5 meters per second, which obviously creates a certain number of, I would say, challenges for a wind turbine manufacturer, because this is not what you would typically see in pretty much any other country in the world. We usually see low turbines, wind speeds, again, and here it's actually really the contrary. You can see a very, very high turbulence intensity, which actually increase also when you get on higher altitude up the mountains. And this creates challenges for us. And I would say these challenges are impacting somehow also the cost of energy, because we need to install, I would say, a more reliable or more a stronger turbine that we would normally install in those average wind speeds. So smaller rotors to resist to those high turbulences. Whereas if we had the ability to install larger rotors, we could probably extract a lot more energy and definitely decrease the cost of energy in Korea. So that's why also I've always got this question very often: why is the cost of energy so high in Korea? And this is really just the wind parameters. We also see that there is a consistent wind shear of 0.15, which actually helps somehow with the profitability of the project, because we have the ability to go higher, to also try to tap slightly higher wind speeds. And with higher wind speeds, obviously, that increases the project profitability. So the higher we get, the higher wind speeds, that's good. Obviously, also the more expensive the turbine gets with the higher tower, the more challenges you get in terms of roads, crane pads, etc., to transport and install those higher turbines. And this is also where I believe it's very important for us to engage at a very early stage with the developers to look at all those aspects, especially on the transport side, on the design of the wind farm layout. Where are we going to erect the boom for the crane, the size of foundation and crane pads, etc., etc. We are bringing innovative solution on the market using different types of cranes also. So lots of things can be done, and the earlier the better, because obviously it's a bit too late when you've got all your final permits, environmental permits, construction permits, and then you can't change anything, and you come to see us, and we don't really, or we cannot optimize the site. So that's why we are very much engaging with most of the developers in Korea at a very early stage. We have a great team there in Korea. As I said, we've been there for 22 years now. So we've got a big staff there, and obviously maintaining more than 500 megawatts there. So good experience. Touching on a bit the portfolio that Vestas offers in Korea, we now have 3 turbines certified or in process of certifications for Korea. We have obviously the older portfolio, which because of the KEA certification requirement is no longer certified anymore, but we had a lot more turbines before, and those requirements have changed. I think what is important to understand is that because of the lower wind speed and high turbulence, actually we need to really find where that siteability of the wind turbine lays. So most of those turbines are class 2 turbines, but again we are certifying them class S standards and allowing us to actually resist some of higher turbulences in exchange of a lower average wind speeds. That's really done by all our experts in siting using CFD modeling and obviously looking very carefully at the control logic of the wind turbine and the pitching and how to reduce as much as we can all those loads, optimizing the layout to reduce the wake effects, which obviously also have a huge impact on the turbulences, etc., etc. So again, engage with us as early as possible because we can help mitigating some of these issues that you may encounter during your project development. I'm not going to touch too much about that. I think Vince was very clear about the explanation. We've seen the S&P stable or going slightly up. We've seen the REC going very much down, and obviously that mainly comes from offer or supply and demand imbalance on the REC side, as much as also on the S&P side. So we have seen a general trend of PPA price going down over the last 2 to 3 years, which obviously makes investments a lot more difficult than it was, despite the fact that we are bringing newer technology, bigger rotors, bigger generators, etc., etc. It is more and more difficult for developers in Korea to achieve, I would say, a profitable project at the moment. And that comes also due to a few other aspects, and that's mainly project delays. The development cost in Korea is extremely high compared to, I would say, international standards. And that has several root causes. One is obviously the timing to develop a project in Korea. Renewable energy, being solar, being wind, is usually considered a very, very quick deployment source of energy. You can develop a project in 2 to 3 years, pretty much everywhere in the world. In Korea, I would say 5 years would be probably the shortest time I've seen. And yeah, the permitting process is extremely slow. We've seen obviously even more roadblocks in the last years with that transfer of responsibility from the central government to the local government to approve some of the permitting process. I thought this was initially done with very good intention to actually take out bottlenecks at the central government level and to pass that to the local government, who then would have more easiness, I would say, and capability to assess projects that they have locally, so they would go faster in approving. It has unfortunately been the complete opposite effect. Local governments have been holding to permits and hijacking somehow all the permitting of most of the wind farms since they have this power. We can see a very, and I think that's typical also from what happens in Korea with pretty much everything at the political level, is that they really want to have not just a consensus, but they want to have 100% of the people within the local community to approve a project. 99% is not good enough. And that is a real problem for developers. So I hope also that some of the things that are being discussed on how to compensate also the local community will help with that. And that's something that I know the Danish government has been supporting the Korean government in trying to also explain how it's done in Denmark and other countries on compensation levels, who should be compensated depending on distances, etc., etc. So there is some work done there between the two countries, which I hope will help. EIA approval also has been extremely slow, not clear guidelines on what needs to be done, what are the standards for those EIA approval. We've seen a lot of projects which applied for a certain number of positions and taken out half of the project without really any reason. And obviously, when you apply for a 100 megawatt project and you plan to invest in a 100 megawatt substation, a 40, 60, whatever kilometer transmission line, etc., etc., then your project might be profitable. But if tomorrow this project is only 50 megawatt, then the project is not profitable anymore. And that has impacted a lot some of the projects, and obviously they don't even know why they haven't been given the permits because they are using or trying to use international standards. And again, there is no reference, there is no standards which would say, well, if you do this according to these guidelines, you will get an approval. If you don't do it well, guys don't expect an approval, and you would be rejected. But no, there's not such standards yet. And then there is the last factor, which is that there is no grid capacity. The average timing to get connection permits is between 6 months to 2 years. And that has been stacking up tremendously over the last 2 years, especially because of the solar farms applications. You can see that at the moment there is more than 2.4 gigawatts as of last year. Well, 2 years ago, 2018, that was pending allocation for grid capacity, 2.1 being in the Geoia provinces. So big bottleneck there in terms of grid rights or grid permitting. Then obviously I've seen those questions popping up in the previous presentation from Vince. I want to be as transparent as we can. Vestas is not manufacturing the wind turbines in Korea. The size of the market does not allow to produce in Korea efficiently and at a reasonable cost for us to be competitive there. We sell 100 megawatt a year for a good year, you know, out of obviously 18 gigawatt that we sold last year. It's a drop of water in the sea. But that doesn't mean that we don't do what we can to participate to the economy in Korea. Last year, we spent actually twice what we earned in revenue in Korea. We spent more than 190 million euro in 2008. And last year, when I made this calculation, we had, as of September 2019, already purchased or procured 180 million euro in Korea. And this is because we source towers in Korea that we export to different countries in the world. When we don't source the towers, we export steel to make those towers in other factories, such as in Vietnam. Here we have a factory in Vietnam owned by a Korean company. They export the steel in the Vietnam factory, but we also procure large equipment such as bridges, chemical products. All our Korean projects, we source the tower locally in order to promote Korean, I would say, local content. And then there is an interesting calculation that we've done with one of our customers on a 42 megawatt project there in Korea, where we looked at their cost, our cost, balance of plans, etc., the whole value chain, including even their profit, the financing cost, etc., and the 20-year lifetime operation and maintenance. And when you look at what we import, is 20% actually of the total bill during, I would say, the construction period. And then there is for spare parts and others, another 8 to 9% of imported equipment, experts that will have to fly in Korea. So we tried to make really a whole assessment of the total value chain here. And the profit, it was a local customer, Korean customer, so obviously the financing, everything was taken into consideration. Balance of plant was done by a local Korean EPC contractor. Transport was done also locally, installation using local cranes, etc., etc. And you can see part of the WTG here that was in that case the towers that was manufactured in Korea. Big cost here of almost 8% of development cost also obviously goes into that, and that's money that is spent in permitting, in communities, compensation, etc. as well. So big amount here in Korea, which you might not have as big in other jurisdiction. And what does that create as well? Well, every time we sell one of these projects, and 40 megawatt is probably on the high side, most of them, the sites we build in Korea are smaller usually, but we see now a few projects which are slightly bigger. That creates 60 to 75 jobs at peak time during the construction period to do all the civil works and electrical works on the wind farm. And then another 12 long-term jobs that will be here for 20 years or more can be created in the local community. We, for sure, need to involve and engage with the local community. We try to hire people that are already living there, and we train them so they can maintain the wind farm, because we know that they will be there for the long run. They know that it will be closed, and if you ring them, they can access the turbine quickly. We know that it's part also, obviously, of corporate and social responsibility. So we are creating jobs, and what we've seen, not just in Korea, but in the world in general, that helps protect also this movement from people leaving rural regions, because obviously wind farms are usually located in quite remote places. That helps create stability within those remote places where usually all the young people would just leave to go to the big city. And that's really something also that I think the local authorities are valuing somehow. But again, in Korea, there is a lot of opposition, and yeah, we don't see that level of acceptance as we would see in other countries. But that's something that we are trying to educate also, that we are engaging not just in compensating people, but in creating value and jobs and economy over the long run there. I'm conscious of time, so I'll go quick on the rest. One of the issues we see in Korea that also increase the cost of energy is this mandatory certification called KEA certification for the Korea Energy Agency. That is very costly and time also. That obviously limits our ability to also certify all the portfolio that we would like to have certified in Korea, because of this cost and need for experts and resources and time needed to maintain those certifications as well. And the fact that there are actually only two accredited certification bodies to deliver such certification, with only one actually, which I would say we can rely on, which is an international body, which we believe is capable of doing it. So that is a problem, because this extra cost and time is built obviously in the cost when we sell a turbine in Korea. We have to amortize this cost, and it's also a big risk for us every time we take the decision to certify a new model. If we would not have this certification, then the developer would not benefit from the REC on that project. So it's something that obviously is mandatory, has to be done when we commission the wind farm, together with all the other KEPCO tests, the substation. We need to present all those certificates. So yeah, that's something that has been also reinforced, I would say, and even more difficult in recent times. In the past, as of 3 or 4 years back, Korea, KEA was recognizing somehow the type certificate that we normally do and use for 99% of the countries in the world, and issue their certification with obviously some control, sometimes some audit of factories, but something quite limited. Now it's a full-blown certification, which is extremely costly and double the work that we need to do, and is as costly as a full IEC type certificate. And this is a burden that I think Korea could definitely avoid, because it's not protecting their industry. The proof is that Vestas is the leader on the market, and there is a couple of other foreign OEMs on the market which are much bigger and much more competitive than the local OEMs. And the local OEMs, if they want anyway to play in the space, I think the KEA certification is not enough. They will have, or they will need an IEC type certification anyway to get lenders and or even customers, foreign customers, to buy their equipment. So they also have to do both, I believe. So no value here, just losing time, money for everyone, making the price of energy higher, which in the end ends up into taxpayers. So not something that we believe is really should be required if they really wanted to achieve the targets and the goals that they have by 2030. I do believe that it would be much more beneficial for everyone to get rid of these requirements. But this is the reality, and this is obviously something that we're trying to discuss with the authorities so they can realize that this is actually counterproductive, both for us and also their local manufacturers. Finally, the central permitting system, which was in the past in place, now is not working great. We hope that they can, and we know that they are working on simplifying and standardizing those permitting processes. But today, Ministry of Forest will protect the environment by preventing you to cut trees. So you cannot install a wind farm because you cannot cut trees, you know, and that's, I think, something which sometimes doesn't make any sense, because there are plans to replant trees afterwards or to find other places to restore nature, etc., etc. And again, you're here to save CO2. So ultimately, a wind farm is much more beneficial than cutting a certain number of trees. And there are standards in the world for these. So currently in Korea, the Ministry of Forest can stop a project if they want to. The local government, as I said, there's not really standards and rules. They are very, very local. So no one knows how to get a permit locally because every county and city has a different standard. And finally, no set of standard, as I mentioned earlier, for the EIA delivered by the Ministry of Environment, and also a very long queue. So hopefully, we also have been introducing them, and I know that the Danish Embassy has been very active in that as well, to show what Denmark has been done with a one-stop shop, which is one entity in the government in charge of discussing with all the different entities within the government and get a fast track on all those permits, and to also unify the standards. So fingers crossed this happens sooner than later. And that's all. Thank you very much. I will, be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Mr. William. Yes, and yeah, there is also some questions for you, and because I have heard the answers covered by your previous presentation, and if there is like the third question maybe haven't been covered yet, would you please maybe answer the third one?
Sure. Look, I believe that within today's environment, it is not possible for a foreign developer to enter the Korean market without a significant investment in Korean resources. You need to have Korean people on the ground that are close to the local communities, to the councils and cities where you have your projects. And I've seen some of, I would say, foreign developers or IPPs looking at the Korean market, thinking that they could do everything remotely or with majority of resources doing remotely. It is a different system. It's a very complex also to navigate the rules and regulation. And there is obviously a very strong aspect of including the community and so on. So some of those foreign developers are looking for a local partner. That is a possibility. I think there is a complete possibility that you, well, as a foreign developer, incorporate a company 100% in Korea. There's no issues with that. But obviously, having local people is mandatory. What we see as well is obviously, and that's one of those local content requirements. I think obviously for a foreign developer, it's not as easy as for a local developer to negotiate the PPA. We've heard that the PPA offered to foreign developer is significantly lower than to Korean companies. It's not my fight. I don't know how much of the truth that is, but definitely That would help to also have a lot more transparency at the government level. If they really want to build that many megawatts, I think they will need to also bring foreign investors and foreign lenders ultimately as well. They will need to start also building a little bit more standards and apply those standards. I think foreign companies can bring a lot of know-how of how things are done overseas as well. Best practices, etc., can be shared. So I think there is a space for everyone. When you're looking at the 15 gigawatt or 16 gigawatt of wind to be built in 10 years, that's 1.6 gigawatt a year. There should be space for plenty of people. But the reality is now the market is still less than 200 megawatt onshore year on year. And unless the government change things, it's not going to take off. So there are a lot of things that has to happen from the regulatory point of view. And if this happens, I think that there will be a space for both local and foreign developers to play a role on the market, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And one more last question is from the Q&A box, because I saw several questions have mentioned the hub height, and they are very curious about the typical hub height you are installing in South Korea, or the hub heights are for the upcoming projects.
Yeah. So at the moment, we have we have installed up to 125. So obviously up to, if you look at international standards, it's not a high hub height, but for Korea, which was in the past 80, 90 meters or even lower than 100, it's been a big change. We are working on projects with 135 to 140 meter hub heights, and even looking at solutions to go up to 160 in the future. These can be achieved through different solutions which are now available. For example, in Germany, we use a lot what we call the large diameter steel towers, where the bottom sections are actually cut in 3 and then we assemble them on site. So that allows to have very small sections of the tower transported very easily to the site and then assembled on site, so reducing transport challenges. There is not a limitation per se, usually not in Korea, about hub height limitation or blade tip restrictions. For whatever reasons, I've only seen that very few times. I think that it was only because these projects were permitted some time before and they had applied for a low hub height. But if you apply for a high hub height, we've seen that there is no restrictions and you can apply for higher hub heights. So it's really down to the transport constraint, the cranes that you use. Obviously, if we go higher, 160 meter, we will probably have to use tower cranes like we've done in Thailand, or we're doing now in Vietnam for 160 meter hub heights solutions that we have under construction in Vietnam and that we have built in Thailand last year. And these are very specific, and it's also because of you try to reduce the size of the crane pad as much as you can to reduce civil works cost for once, but also because of permitting issues. And usually in Korea, it's because of the size of the civil works, or the amount of civil works that you allowed during the permitting or by the permitting and the EIA study. So we try to work on these solutions. Today in Korea, there is no tower cranes, and that's why also the lack of scale at this stage and the lack of permitting, which has blocked pretty much all the wind farms to be built over the last year or so, has been obviously not very good for the industry. We're very hopeful that this year will be a major game changer with the elections this year of the government winning a large majority and really advocating for renewables. I really hope that they're doing the good things in order to unlock that. So yeah, if there was more volumes, then it would be easier for suppliers to bring tower cranes to Korea and unlock much higher towers than we've seen until now. Yeah.
Yes, and many thanks for the kind explanation. So if you have time, there is lots of questions also waiting for you to answer in the Q&A box. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And next we will welcome our next presenter, Mr. Jack Case, Country Manager, South Korea from Equinor, who who is responsible for Equinor's activities in Korea. And Mr. Jack, yes, okay, I can see your presentation right now. So yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody. I am Jacques Michel. I am the country manager for Equinor in Korea. I'm happy to be invited today to present Equinor ambition in Korea, and where we are actually looking to develop opportunities offshore wind and the renewable industry, including solar, battery storage, and low carbon solution, for example, hydrogen. After presenting shortly Equinor, I will go through our ambition and the results to date, and then go a bit more on the status of what we are doing in Korea before concluding and show how Equinor can contribute to Korea renewable ambition. I guess both Vince and William presented quite a few interesting points about making business in Korea, and I will go through some of them and show how we, in a way, try to solve them as Equinor here in the project we are doing now. So Equinor, I guess first it's important for me to start with the strategy. It's always safe, high value and low carbon. And this is a clear direction from our CEO to whatever we are doing globally with Equinor. And for us in the renewable division, this is translated in delivering a safe and high value renewable business. And that's really the way we are going to work here in Korea. So if I go to the next one, which is a short overview of Equinor, I think it's important to say that Equinor now is a global energy company. And we are delivering energy to about 170 million people every day. But a very important thing is that Equinor is a state-owned company by the Norwegian state at 67%. And as such, it is a great responsibility for all Equinor employees toward the Norwegian people. And that's really will actually shape the way we are working. Equinor is managed as any other private-owned companies, and we are registered in Norwegian and New York Stock Exchange. And we have more than 50 years of experience working offshore in close relation with the local communities. And it was pointed out earlier presentation how important it is in Korea. And that's really how Equinor works for any projects we have in the world. So you see the number on the screen. I guess which interests us now here today is really about that Equinor now is a real renewable energy provider. We are providing renewable energy to 1 million people in Europe, and we expand this business area. So before starting more in details on our floating offshore strategy and roadmap, I think it's important for me to go through who we are. We are an energy company, as I said. We are a vision where we say that we want to shape the future of the energy. And we are a values-based company where for every single project we work on, we value openness, courageous, collaborative, and caring. And everything, as I said in my introduction, we have clearly stated in our strategy that we are an energy company committed to a long-term value creation in a low-carbon future. So, our wind journey. Equinor is a major offshore wind player, both with regards to bottom fixed and floating wind. We have now installed 1 gigawatt in UK and Germany. We have this Sheringham Shoal fields, Dungeon and Arkona. And we are in the phase of developing 10 gigawatts in UK, US, and Poland with Dogger Bank, US East Coast, Empire outside New York, and in the Baltic Sea in Poland. But with regards to floating technology, Equinor is a front runner. We, with the first floating farm in the world in Scotland with 30 megawatts, and we are now finalizing in the final phase to install 100 megawatts in Norway, or 100 megawatts in Norway, of floating wind farm. Floating is a new industry, and we have a high ambition, as you can see. We are going to position ourselves to get 12 gigawatts by 2030, and in this plan, Korea will play an important role. So what is the roadmap for this floating wind strategy? Yeah, we started quite early, actually. 20 years ago, started with a high wind demo with first power in 2009. It was a small demo outside Norway, in the sea outside Stavanger, 2.3 megawatts. And when we finally put the technology, then we went over to a first wind farm, floating wind farm in Scotland, with Hywind Scotland first power in 2017 to the Scottish people. And what we see, and I guess you can as well go on our website, equinor.com, you will see all the information we are sharing now, every technical data that we have from this farm. We see capacity factors above 50%. And that's very, very, very interesting. That shows that having offshore floating wind farm is a very efficient way of producing energy. This gives us as well the basis to look at the development for the next stage. And the next stage, as I said, is in Norway, about 100 megawatts. But we will as well look at developing now a more cost reduction activities. And that's where Korea will come in play, Scotland, Spain, Greece, and France, where we are going to go through our technology and see how we can scale what we have done for Hywind Scotland and Hywind Company. And finally, we will come in the industrialization phase, where we will have the ambition to get some level of cost of energy around 40 to 60 euros per megawatt hour by 2030. And that will give us the opportunity to compete with other sources of energy. Our floating wind, I guess, as you see here, we believe really that floating offshore wind is the next wave in the renewable energy. And that our experience from the North Sea for the last 50 years will make us best qualified to lead the way and further develop floating offshore wind. We have tried and tested floating wind turbines already in production, and we are the world-leading floating offshore wind developer, and that's a position we intend to keep. And floating turbine can be, as you know, placed in waters and are deeper than 60 meters, getting the best wind resources. And I guess with regards to technology, we started with a spar concept, and that's very suitable for the North Sea with deep water. But now we have a screen and evaluate other concepts, and we see that we will go for still semi-sub to complement our Hywind part technology. And when we look at Korea, we will most likely look at using these semi-sub floaters. So what are we doing in Korea? First, we opened an office in Busan last year in October. And we are now, and it has been quite clearly stated in the presentation before me, that local competencies is a key success factor. So we are now in the expansion phase. We are going to be about 10 local employees in Korea by early next year. And we have a project organization both in Norway and in Korea to capitalize on our experience globally. So what are we doing now in Korea as we speak? We have two major projects now in Korea. The first one is a 200 megawatt floating wind project in collaboration with KNOC, Korean National Oil Company, and EWP, a Genco company in Ulsan. And this project, we have the ambition to have a financial investment decision by 2023 and the first power by 2025. The second project is 800 megawatt floating as well outside Ulsan. This project we are 100% Equinor in. And we will look for partners, as it was specified as well earlier. Of course, we need to involve Korean companies. And this project as well, we have a financial investment decision around 2023 with the first power in 2026. But we are not in Korea. Equinor is not in Korea for only these two projects. And it has been said that Korea has a huge ambition for renewables, and Equinor wants to be part of it. So we are looking at new opportunities in the bottom fixed area, around a gigawatt, and we are looking at other floating opportunities, and we see that around 2 gigawatts. So in Korea, Equinor, we have an ambition of around 3 to 5 gigawatts to 2020, 2030, 2035. But the wind is not all, and it was mentioned, wind to hydrogen could be a good idea. As well, we look at battery storage and floating solar. So Equinor really wants to be a global energy, renewable energy company in Korea. But and some of these areas have been touched on by William and Vince. But what we see now when we are in Korea developing these projects, that we see there is 5 main ingredients. The first one is the regulatory and the policy framework. Have been mentioned, but it's very important to get support from local and central authorities. And in this, Korean President Moon has been very clear with his new Green Deal, and with the ambition by 2050. But as well, for example, if I take the example of Ulsan, we get a great support from Ulsan City. And maybe you have seen in the newspaper today, but yesterday, all the developers for Ulsan area were invited by the mayor of Ulsan to sign to extend the collaboration between Ulsan and the actors in the floating space to secure that we really put all our effort together. And that's this kind of signals are very important when we want to enter a new country, develop new projects to really secure the support of the authorities. But of course, we cannot do that as well. We need a transparent and stable, predictable regulatory framework, and we need a clear route to the market with incentives. And that was named in the presentation before. The regulatory framework is in place. It can be performed, but we have something to work on. And there is some incentives to support development of renewable in Korea. And of course, now we are working on to see how we can build on that. Then, as I say, we have a big, an ambition of 3 to 5 gigawatts, and many of other of our competitors the same. And I guess ability to build scale is very important. That will drive the cost reduction. That will as well drive the ability to have synergies across the project. And for us, when we are looking at scale, we are as well looking at availability of the grid access and capacities. And we see that we will need to look at how we can do that. And suitable wind and meteor resources. William spoke about 7.5 max, I guess it was onshore. What we see now offshore, and we are 40 kilometers from the coast, 50 kilometers from the coast, we see speed up to 8.5, sometimes 9. Then the supply chain. Local content was named. It's not a requirement, but strongly recommended. And I guess Korea has the supply chain in place to develop a huge offshore wind floating project. They have a world-class offshore supply chain, and they have a large availability and big yards which are needed for offshore wind development. This construction takes a lot of place, and they have as well a lot of know-how and technologies. And in this respect, Equinor, we have worked with the Korean yards for the last 15 years, building our oil and gas installations. So we have a very good relationship and very good understanding of the competence from the yards in Korea. And that's part of this cost game as well. Then local acceptance. I guess it's really a part of Equinor's value. Over the last 50 years, we have experience of working with communities which have activities linked to the ocean, and understanding local culture, building local team is important. It's all about trust. And to build trust, we need transparency. We need to engage, explain what we are doing, and do what we said we were going to do. Understanding the culture and the differences. It's not like you take your Norwegian or Danish or whatever model of Korea. Of course, you have to adapt to where you are. And there is room for coexistence and collaboration. And this really to find these rooms and to make them possible. So local acceptance is another major key ingredient. And finally, I will say that, of course, we do that to sell power to the market. So we have to find the right market. We have to see that there is a real willingness from the Korean from the Korean government to increase renewable power in the energy mix. And we have to look at the RPS composition, which is in Korea quite well settled, and how the shift from coal, nuclear, gas energy will go over to renewable, and at what pace. So that was really the 5 main ingredients that we are looking at, or what we are working on every day. And if I should say, how can we as Equinor help South Korea to realize its offshore wind ambition? Well, first, Equinor, we are a global energy player, and we are in Korea, and that's very important. We have a 20 years experience working with Korea, and that's where we can build as well on our Equinor's global offshore experience and long-term presence in Korea. Secondly, we have a proven floating concept. We are the only offshore wind floating renewable producer today, and with almost 100 megawatt floating offshore wind capacity in operation. Technical and financial strong developer. We do in-house development, as we've shown for Highwind. We do the execution and the operation of the projects, as we do in UK and Germany. And we have a strong balance sheet, which gives us the opportunity to take the financial decision needed. So, as a conclusion, I would say, why offshore wind? I guess we see that there is a global rise in the energy consumption and increase of uptake of net zero commitments. We see that we managed to get a rapid cost reduction of offshore wind, which make it competitive towards other source of energies. And I guess William didn't touch on it, but it's more and more constrained for onshore renewable. And we see that offshore wind is the next place to be. We can be bottom fixed near shore. We can be offshore wind floating far away from the shore. And that's really where we see the next development for wind renewable. Why offshore wind? I guess in addition to what I've said of the capacity factors we can achieve far away with stronger winds, we see as well that we can develop technologies which will compete, and that's where we are when we build a new industry is really how to develop the competitiveness of this industry. Equinor, we are a global offshore wind major. We have experience from decades of offshore experience. We are the world leading floating offshore wind developer, and we have a proven and validated technology. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Jacques. Here is also some questions from audience for you and Equinor. And would you mind answer the three of them?
Yeah, first one, nearshore versus pure offshore. I guess it's a really question of cost, water depth, and wind speeds. What we see is that up to 50-meter water depths, it's better to have a bottom fix. Over that, cost for bottom fix start to increase, and that's why we have developed this floating concept. So it's really a cost game actually to decide which kind of technology we are going to develop, or which kind of where we are going to develop the wind farm. And so I answer the two first questions together actually, because nearshore is pure offshore is really about wind speed, and floating versus fixed bottom is really about cost. And then you can add on the top, of course, communities and access to the grid and so on. It's a lot of parameters, but when we are far offshore, there is less communities complaints than if we are nearshore or onshore. And if I look at the last question, marine operation requirements during installation and certification program of units. Well, the marine operation requirements during installation are not much different than what we do when we install our oil and gas installations. And we are now in the early phase here in Korea to look at our development and where we are going to build these infrastructures. But I guess this certification program will have to be adapted to the type of floaters that we are going to develop. So
yeah, thank you. And yes, offshore wind is really very attractive, and it is really a goal that needs to be mined. And there is also a lot of questions from the Q&A box. And I found that one most mentioned one is about the offshore floating projects in Osan, yes, by Equinor. And can you, is it possible for you to introduce the latest progress of the cost of the project?
the cost of the project.
Yes.
I will. We haven't yet defined costs. We are in the now. As you know, we are in the process of getting the last consenting approvals to be able to install our LiDAR in the areas, and we will then start to do detailed engineering and look at what will be the cost of the project. So at the time now, I cannot come with a cost for this project.
Yeah, totally understand and appreciate your answers. So lastly, yes, we indeed have learned a lot from all our three speakers. And again, many thanks for our three speakers. And at last, I would like to remind all of the audience of our physical conference is the Green Energy Future South Korea 2020 on this September. And it is on the 1st to 2nd in Seoul. And this event will gather for industry chain to discuss the orderly planning roadmap to solar, wind storage, as well as the projects that shape the country's renewable plan. And if you register due 30th June, you will enjoy like 10% of super early bird discount. So should you have any inquiries, don't hesitate to contact us. And one more repeat again, what you'll care about is the recordings. The recordings will be shared by email link within next week, and it is for all of our audience. So thank you again for your participation, and see you next time. Thank you.